Therefore, its panacea of rote learning, its assessment systems, its pressure, its examinations, its 9 to 9, kids have no space, all of that comes from rank and results. Everything alternate to that, self-paced learning, individual IPs, individual-based plans, anything else, we can easily call alternate education. Think of it like this. If the mainstream education was able to absorb the needs of society, we would not need an alternate plan. It's just that our mainstream education is kind of rigid, it's kind of regimented, which is why alternate plans always spring up in society. So if you go back to the previous speakers when we talked about 1980s or even 1880s, there was a system that India was following, which was contrasted by British Raj. But still, you would have a Krishnamurti, which did slightly alternate ways. At one time, even Montessori was alternate, until it became mainstream. So today, we don't think of Montessori as an alternate method of learning. We still think of Aurobindo, Auroville, as alternate, for instance, because it's not part of our mainstream. So that's, in my mind, a loose kind of definition. Let me give you a small example. Inside the classroom, I believe anything in education is actually the teaching learning process. What happens inside the classroom is the heart and the soul of the matter. So let's take an example of where kids are learning about birds. In a mainstream, they would learn about different kinds of birds, their habitats, where they're found in geography, and they would have to memorize and reproduce all of that. In an alternate school, they would be encouraged to spend time with the bird, stroke the bird, listen to the sound of the bird, differentiate the different chirpings of the bird, identify feathers of the bird, and then build an inner consciousness or a connection with nature. So if results and ranks in mainstream kind of drove wealth and status, alternate education is also looking at success, but which is individualized, which means whatever the kid wants to do, the kid will learn to do. Mainstream has often been criticized as a factory approach. So think of it like this. There are roll calls because the workers have to come to site. The bells have to ring because the shifts have to change. There has to be a uniform because people will go missing. And then there are rewards and punishments. Therefore, today, more than ever, a need for alternate schooling. I want to share with you one example of a live parent that I know. See, alternate schooling is sometimes also called homeschooling, because when parents are not able to find solutions, they do it at home. In the US, there are 3 million kids being homeschooled. In India, my God, it's a huge task. So think of a child who has interests in learning violin. It's going to cost a bomb to teach violin in the house. If the child wants to pick and choose and become a naturist, you don't even find a tutor. If the child, and if they're homeschooled, the teachers don't even have maintained discipline. So they'll come for 3 days and they don't come for 4 days. Individual teaching sometimes is 1 lakh, 2 lakhs. So every subject is 1 lakh, 2 lakhs. It's the most expensive way to teach a kid today. So homeschooling in India is going to be a far cry, but sometimes homeschool and alternate schools in America get intermingled. I'm going to end with one example, or a story, little story. Let me take an example, compare that to our classrooms. Every time I'm talking about the school, please compare it to our classrooms. I'm going to call it, and I read it on the net, call it an animal classroom, an animal school. And here there are the students. There is a duck. When the teacher is teaching flying, swimming, the duck is exceptional. But when the duck has to run, the poor duck, because of its webbed feet, no matter how much it tries, it can never, ever get beyond a sea. So So much so that it has to spend less and less time swimming and more time running, because the teacher wants it to get an A in running. Another student is a rabbit, outstanding in running. But when he has to climb, he gets a psychological disorder. And what happens? The teacher starts to label him. It's a real struggle for the rabbit to go to school because he can't handle climbing. Another student is a squirrel. He's almost flying everywhere. But the class teacher is telling the squirrel, you can't fly from top of the tree. You have to start at the bottom. And the squirrel is wondering, when flying is supposed to be at higher altitudes, why do you have to stop at the bottom? There's the eagle who defies all discipline. He just wants to do things his way. He's a misfit in the classroom. And finally, there's an animal called gopher. Essentially, they dig soil. This animal cannot even go to school because there is no gopher which is digging soil. Curriculum doesn't exist. So these gophers are out of school. Now, when you have a school with a duck and a rabbit and an eagle and a squirrel and a gopher, how can one size fit all work? Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your time.
And after this, we'll ask them some questions. So please be ready with questions.
Good evening. Do we require an alternate system of education? And I've always felt that we should have. India being such a big country with so much of population, and they have, in any good system or society, we need to have alternate system of education. And since what we call today alternate education, before 1835, before the Macaulay Minute, this was the formal sort of education India had. And if you go back, only in 1835, with the English coming into India and introducing a formal education system, what we call, this is now the formal education system. So by this, earlier to 1835, we used to have Gurukula, Vedic system of education, and it continued. And in this particular system, we had the various philosophies which were based on culture, different psychological philosophies, and on life skills. And this was the basic education system of India then. But since 1835, it's changed, and now I'm going to talk more about what in India at the moment the confusion is all about. At one point of time, we debate whether we require an alternative form of education. The answer is yes. Even the government of India says yes. But the government of India itself at the moment is confused about this entire system because I think most of you all know the right to education was introduced in 2009. And under right to education, we have no mention of this sort of education. There is no mention of homeschooling. There is no mention what to do with homeschooling, what to do with the Gurukula system or the madrasa system or anything like that. So, and at the same time, the HRD ministry set up NIOS to make sure the people who want to do alternate education get into NIOS and are able to get into a formal integration into the education system. So what I mean to say is, first, the policymakers should get it right, whether India has to be only into formal education or we need an alternate education. So it is, I think, a lot of people who could give thought to this should, in fact, make a policy framework for alternate education because a country like India with such a huge population requires alternate. For example, in alternate education, there is, a lot of you all here are competent enough to know that many times in a formal education, we follow literally, we may not be able to give individualized attention. Or for example, somebody may be gifted, a gifted child or somebody may require more additional help. But on the formal system, alternate form of education, this is definitely possible. And in the past, people like Rabindranath Tagore, Sri Aurobindo, and all of them have time and again proved. So not taking more time, I would conclude that India, being such a large country, requires different sort of education systems, and definitely alternate education system is one of the options to look for.
Thank you very much. Can I have you on the dais now? And they're a very new school, just about 4 years, but they've done remarkable work so far.
Good evening, everyone. I take this opportunity to talk little about the alternative education. We all know, like, education is something, or the schools are meant to give education to children, but how and what we are going to do is a real big challenge. Most of the times, we talk about the rote method of teaching, or we expect children to learn what we want. But when you come to the teaching methodologies, we are all aware of the deductive and the inductive method of teaching, what we can use in the classrooms. We talk about hands-on activity, we talk about practical sessions, we talk about taking children to the live situations, but how far it is really possible in the classroom setting is very important. When you take up the past, the best education practice is in our country, which most of the other countries are adopting nowadays. But we are fascinated to adopt the practices which are abroad. We are still not able to accept that we are the origin for many kinds of education system, and we are really, standing as a role model for many of the education systems which others are following. For example, the Finland education, nowadays we tell that is the first. But if you take up the gist of what they are doing there, you can find out that that is what we were doing in the initial days. So what is going to happen? As the style changes, as the era is changing, we are going back to the old systems only. Probably that is what is going to happen, wherein we'll go back to the past and try to adopt what was existing before. Probably that would be the alternative education system which is going to happen in the country as well. You know, using technology as an aid is very, very good, but trying to substitute a teacher or the classroom teaching with technology, I don't think it's a fair idea. You know, if the future goes on like this, technology, there will not be schools. There will be only home learning wherein, you know, teachers or the profession itself will be, extinct. You may not have the schools wherein the formal schooling happens, but really it's a question wherein we have to think, instead of doing something different, why don't we do the same thing in a different way? I think that's what is required in this alternative education, which really makes sense. Thank you very much. I'll not take much of the time.
Thank you. And now our last panelist.
Good evening, all. I think you guys have got a quite amount of a good session already, so I won't take much of the time. So the most important point, what I look into alternative education is as a system, is it really depends upon the child and how the child has been desiring and progressing. Every child has a goal. Even a child who is 1 year old has a goal to achieve something. So it looks to be very important that if there is a demand and the child is requiring an education which is towards alternative systems, so we should definitely have a systems in India which is open, which is transparent, and which helps us to provide education which is formal as well as alternative. And given an option, the parents and the child should have the freedom to choose. You see systems which is across countries like Singapore, Finland. Finland is rather in a stages of changing their systems completely. Though being number one, still they're doing a big change. So it's important that we keep doing changes and improvising ourselves on a continuous basis. ICSE, CBSE, national curriculums took really a long time to understand this. Once they saw, the international curriculums like CIA and IB coming in, then, the level of understanding and focus and is now definitely is going to be improving. I mean, if I am right, then very soon ICSE is also going to be changing the systems to primary levels and middle schools. So it's very important to look into how the demand of the people is. There is going to be a system for both. There is going to be demand for both. But it's very important that the parent and the requirement of the child is being looked into from the basis. And now I'll leave it to you guys to ask any questions to any of the panel. Oh, you guys, she's going to be asking us the questions.
I have just 4 questions for our panelists, and then you're free to ask. So, any of you can answer these. Can one of you give us an example of, Naren, you've already done it, about how you've helped a kid who was struggling with academia and has made something in his life?
We run a school for special children. You would have heard the case of dyslexia. So we have individual learning plans for every child. We believe that every dyslexic child is gifted. It's not really a problem at all. We've had several successes. We've had a child build a car on nitrogen gas and got sponsorship and went to Spain. We've had several rifle shooters come out of the school. We've had several movie actors. We've had several computer scientists come out of the school. So I think a great environment just to identify the individual aptitude of the child is the starting and can take them real places.
Thank you. Does what we call the third teacher, and by what I mean the third teacher is the infrastructure and the environment of the school, help in making a difference in the learning of a child? I think one question for every panelist. I'll repeat it. What we call the third teacher, meaning that does the infrastructure and the environment make a difference in learning of the child?
Yeah, it makes a real difference. When you take the child to the practical settings and show the children what is live over there, they understand much better. Environment really plays. The conducive environment, either a classroom setting or outside the classroom, which is relevant to the topic what is being taught. It is really very, very important for any child to learn.
Thank you. And you know now there's a lot of schools who are making open classrooms, and you can bring them together, open it up, the children just walk through, they have stations, especially with the little younger ones, and that really makes a difference. Now, technology, would you still say that we'll become full technology school, or we use it as a tool?
Technology is always assistance to good teachers. So technology will never be a total solution. It's just a part of the solution. So I don't think so. Even in alternate education, technology will totally take over. It's just wherever, let it be formal schooling or alternate schooling, technology will only remain an assistance.
Thank you. Naren, maybe this is for you. Because you did a lot, which I had, especially I wanted to say, Naren, how would you say that now your teachers are not really teachers, but facilitators for your students?
Okay. You know, I keep hearing people kind of banding out words like mentors, teachers, facilitators, but I think really net, we all there for one reason, and that's our students' success. And that student success, as Manas said as well, is very individual to every child. So I think a teacher is somebody who can really help facilitate, can mentor a child, can coach a child. We really have to play multiple roles. So really, if you look at coaching, it's really to help someone achieve an academic goal. But the role we have to play as teachers, educators, is way beyond that. It's really to help a child achieve their life goals. It's to help them when things are not going so well. It's to help them find direction. It's to help them set goals and work towards them. So I think someone who just looks at the role as imparting certain knowledge they have, that's very restricted. It really has to go way beyond that. Because, you know, we've got the world at our fingertips now.
Thank you so much, Naren. And Manas,